Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my proposed research. Today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about some proposed and upcoming research aimed at characterizing the drivers and ecological importance of intermittent stream. I am a new graduate student as of this January, so that being said, I welcome any input or suggestions you might have for the project. Okay. Oh, and before we get into it, I would like to thank my major advisor, Tim Walsworth, for all of his contributions. So what are intermittent streams? They are streams that flow predictably for part of the year and then go dry. Now in North America, almost 60% of all of our streams go intermittent at some point. And within the Intermountain West, many of these streams flow seasonally following spring snowmelt and then go dry in the fall. While they have been designated as having a similar ecosystem function as their perennial counterpart, many intermittent streams are not designated, not afforded the same protections under the Clean Water Act since 2019. Now, recent data on climate suggests that patterns of intermittency are increasing across the West. As more of our winter precipitation comes down as rain, and we find higher winter and spring temperatures, we're seeing earlier and earlier peak runoff and stream flow. The result is that many of our formerly perennial streams have gone intermittent. My research is going to be addressing this phenomena at two different scales. In the first chapter, we're looking to identify the landscape and climatic drivers of intermittency for a large spatiotemporal data set in the Northern Rockies. And my second chapter is at a much finer scale. It's going to characterize the ecological importance of intermittent streams for native aquatic species. So chapter one, what are the large-scale drivers of intermittency? As we've established, intermittency is increasing, more of our streams are drying sooner. Now this rate of acceleration towards an intermittent state is mediated not only by climate factors like precipitation, but also by a suite of fixed watershed characteristics. Things like aspect, elevation, and watershed size interact with climate features to dictate whether or not watersheds are particularly vulnerable or resilient to intermittency. Now, in 2019, there was a model developed called the Prosper model that predicted intermittency for streams across the Intermountain West. And to date, this was the largest intermittent stream mapping effort that we have. However, there are a few things that still remained unclear. Most notably, how frequency and duration of intermittency are driven by specific watershed features. The model only applied to unregulated streams, so streams subject to dams and diversion, it did not address. And most relevant to my project, the model does not forecast intermittency across a range of climate scenarios. So in seeking to address this, my question asks first, what are the physiographic and climatic factors that best describe why certain watersheds are more susceptible or resilient to intermittency? And we're going to analyze this under a range of climate scenarios. And the second question, which we won't get into for the sake of time, asks how changing flow permanent patterns affect summer habitat availability for native fishes. So in looking to answer that first question, identifying the landscape and climatic drivers of intermittency, we're going to leverage the PIBO dataset. It's a over 10-year data set from the Forest Service with observations from over 2,000 sites. It's a real exhaustive data set on stream and riparian habitat data. This is going to be the bulk of our input data for the stream flow permanence prediction model that we'll create. From this data set, we can get things like timing of intermittency and watershed area. For what we can't get from the PIBO dataset, we're going to use GIS to fill the gaps on some of that climate and physiographic data, things like annual snowpack. Once we have all of our input data, then we can fit a model to the observed patterns of intermittency. Currently, we're considering both a random forest model or a series of logistic regressions to identify the strongest predictors of intermittency as well as the most vulnerable stream networks. And from there, we can simulate the effect of a changing climate on patterns of intermittency. And so you can ask questions like, say, if snowpack is reduced by 10%, it will increase intermittency in X number of stream miles. So if we're able to model watersheds' vulnerability to intermittence, it can help us predict the response to climate change. And we're hoping to predict this both as a general pattern across the Intermountain West, as well as in more region-specific scales. As many of you know, stream classifications is either wet or dry. It's an integral part to aquatic species assessments, so results from this study can help shape management, as well as help us with just general climate adaptation planning. So moving into chapter 2, which is looking at sort of the ecological repercussions of intermittency. Here we're going to be characterizing a native trout's use of intermittent streams as spawning habitat. So broadly, resources are patchily distributed across the landscape, across space and time, and subsequently animals will tailor their life history strategies in order to take advantage of these habitat pockets. Now, what is temporary aquatic habitat? It is habitat that is available for these discrete periods of time, and it composes a big part of habitat heterogeneity for many aquatic species. And when an aquatic species life history stage overlaps with temporary aquatic habitat availability, they see increases in survival, reproduction, as well as just have a buffer against stochastic events. Big question is, how do native fish use temporary aquatic habitat? It's been very well established that they'll use perennial streams as just rearing, forage, spawning habitat. But given that many native species in the Intermountain West have a life history that overlaps with intermittent tributary availability, it begs the question, are intermittent habitats important for these native fishes? And if so, when and under what conditions? Here in the top right, we have the mottled sculpin and the Yellowstone cutthroat trout, both native to the Intermountain West, and both spring spawners. So if we can show that intermittent tributaries or streams represent critical habitat for these culturally, economically valuable species, it can help change the way that we manage them. To examine this, we are going to be using the Bonneville cutthroat trout as a case study. It is a fish native to the Bonneville Basin, has been reduced to 30 to 40% of its historic range. Now, it's been very well documented that native salmonids will segregate their habitat use according to the needs of their life history stage, oftentimes exhibiting multiple movement patterns within one watershed. And given that this species is a spring spawner and that overlaps with intermittent tributary availability, we're hypothesizing that intermittent tributaries and streams may represent significant spawning habitat in certain years. To study this, we've selected the Logan River watershed as our study site. Has the largest metapopulation of the species in the country. It's a metapopulation stronghold, not only for abundance, but also for genetic purity. This watershed has a hydrograph that is driven by snowmelt in the spring, and it retains base flows throughout the summer. It has been designated as a conservation priority, as well as a blue ribbon fishery, and it's characterized by having a high density of cutthroat trout in the upper watershed, while the lower watershed is dominated by non-native browns. Now, it's been very well documented that spawning by cutthroat trout occurs in many of the spring-fed perennial creeks, most notably Spawn Creek, Temple Fork, and Right Hand Fork. But how does this species use intermittent tributaries in the watershed? Well, in 1999, the Division of Wildlife and the U.S. Forest Service conducted a fall survey on most of the tributaries throughout the watershed. And many of these tributaries are normally intermittent, but given that 1999 was an exceptionally high water year, they retained flows throughout the fall. And what they found was that age classes 0, 1, 2, and even sometimes 3 were present in many of these tributaries. And then what this tells us is that these normally intermittent tributaries represent probable spawning habitat when flow is retained. However, we don't necessarily have a point of comparison. This was a one-time survey. And so we don't know if these habitats are important contributors to spawning across years and changing conditions. So that's where my project comes in. Are these habitats still relevant as spawning grounds under different climate scenarios, particularly as we're finding more and earlier intermittency? So to answer this, we've broken our general question into 2 more specific questions. The first being, which tributaries can physically support spawning for the Bonneville cutthroat trout? Does it meet habitat requirements, basically? The second question is, which intermittent tributaries do the Bonneville cutthroat trout actually use? To answer this, we've identified 14 tributary sites extending from the headwaters up in Idaho down through the middle lower area of the drainage. Now, it's important to note, not all of these tributaries are intermittent every year. Many of them are perennial. We're just going to use this as sort of a point of comparison to see how fish occupy different stream classification types across years. In order to answer that first question, which tributaries can physically support spawning, we are going to deploy data loggers in each one of the aforementioned tributaries. That's going to give us information on temperature and flow duration. From this information, we can calculate degree days available in each tributary. Now, degree days are a cumulative heat unit describing time spent above a given temperature threshold. Each species has a required number of degree days associated with a successful spawn and hatch. For cutthroat trout, this number is around 300 degree days. From this, we're going to create a probability of hatch model for each tributary. Now, this assumes that if spawning can occur, do the eggs accrue enough degree days in order to hatch before the stream runs dry? We're going to pair this with just some basic substrate characterizations in each tributary, doing pebble counts. Cutthroat trout have a range of suitable substrate sizes as indicated by this curve here. So this will help us identify which tributaries can physically support spawning. In order to answer the second portion of the question, which tributaries are the Bonneville cutthroat trout actually using and when, we will employ environmental DNA to detect presence in each tributary, sampling each creek 3 times across the duration of the spawn, which has been roughly established as late April through early July. This is our probability of hatch curve. On the x-axis, we have stream temperature, the y, flow duration. That indice on the right just basically tells you that orange corresponds to a high probability of hatch, whereas blue indicates a low probability of hatch. And so we can apply this to each tributary for different sets of conditions. So walking through just an easy example, this is a tributary in a low water year. It does not meet degree day requirements and it has a low probability of hatch. The same tributary moving into a high water year. Conditions change and subsequently probability of hatch increases. So like I said, we can superimpose each tributary onto this curve to show changes in hatch probability given interannual variation in degree days. This is just a different way of visually representing our data. This is just a little excerpt from the Logan River. Again, orange corresponds to high hatch probability, blue to low. And again, moving from a low water year to a high water year, you see a higher proportion of intermittent tributaries physically able to support spawning. Pairing this with our eDNA results, here black denotes presence, red absence. And similarly, moving from a low to a high water year, we see fish occupying the expanded range of tributaries that can physically support their spawn. So as we've talked about, intermittency is increasing across the West. The results from this study can reveal how natives use this increasingly common alternative habitat. Building upon the results from my first chapter, which will inform us how climate warming can alter the mosaic of habitat available for the species, the results from this study can indicate how the population might adapt and respond to such changes. It'll also allow us to prioritize certain restoration or connectivity projects. Many of these tributaries have culverts near their confluence with the main stem. So say we find a tributary that could physically support spawning, yet we don't detect any presence that could indicate that that tributary is right for a reconnectivity project. And with that, I want to thank you all for listening, as well as Dr. Brett Roper, Dr. Carl Saunders, as well as everyone on my committee and everybody else in the lab. Thank you. Casey. Yeah, so I mean, as I understand eDNA, it can give you species-specific signatures. So with our samples, we could potentially look at what other species are present within each tributary. As far as other sampling methods, we could pair this with just some basic visual surveys. I can't remember if I talked about that or not, but pairing it with basic visual surveys just to see if they're there and what's using it. The 1999 survey in the fall water year, they did, or high water year, they did just electrofishing surveys of most of those creeks, but it wasn't found to be very like, the sampling method, it wasn't very stratified, or it was sort of more opportunistic. And so they were able to get like that age class histogram just for size structure within the Bonneville cutthroat trout community. But given that we'll be sampling during the duration of the spawn, fish stress is a big issue. And so we didn't want to be stepping on reds or disturbing the fish that might be present.
Yes, on the eDNA, do eggs give off the DNA, or are you going to be targeting the spawning fish, or how's that work?
Yeah.
How often are you going to do
So
eDNA?
we're going to sample each tributary 3 times across the duration of the spawn. So it's not necessarily going to be targeted at an age class. As far as I know, eggs don't give off a different signature than, say, an adult or a juvenile. It's going to be more, the targeted aspect is going to be more focused on the timing of the sampling as opposed to what specific DNA snippets we're trying to get out of it. Phaedra?
This is a little beyond your project, but I'm just sort of curious. So something that I've been fascinated with lately is not whether or not a stream goes dry, but the pattern in which it goes dry, because I think it's really influential in places like the Little Rio Grande or Woodward. What does the intermittent data look like in the PIBO data set? Is it just yes or no, or is there any way to do that the way that happens?
I haven't actually seen the PIBO data set yet. That project is still in the early sort of phase of development. Carl would be able to answer that a heck of a lot better than I can. As I understand it, there's photos of every site when they take it, when they survey it, and it's surveyed across a gradient of like wetness. So they'll survey the sites that go dry earliest first, and then moving in. Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Photographs in all of our sites. We should be able to get some of that.
Carl.
When you're looking at your probability of hatch, are you also considering the probability that those hatch swim fry are able to survive afterwards, or is it just those
No.
things can survive?
Yeah, I have Tim on my team, and he's very good at modeling survivability between age classes. So if that's something we wanted to explore, we likely could. But for now, it's just age 0 successive hatch, not necessarily survival between age classes.
Currently, assume they can hatch, they have time to pump out.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys.